Hi, and welcome to a Sunday edition of the And One Podcast. I am your host, Alex West, and today I'm joined by Corban Ford for the third time this week as we round out our series on the tiers of the NBA. This is the bottom tier. If you'd like to listen to the top tier and the middle tier, make sure and check out episodes 1 and 2 of the podcast. They're available on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, wherever it is you listen to your podcasts. So check those out. Brent, take us away. All right, the next tier of teams we wrote this down as teams that have something to prove. They're not quite competitive enough to be cagey in the playoffs. They're, probably the walkover teams when it comes to the early rounds of the playoffs. But they're also teams that have a lot of room for improvement that right now you might have a pessimistic view of them, but in the future, given their style of play or given their improvement, these teams could be exciting. And the teams in this tier, and we'll go through them kind of quickly, are the LA Clippers, the Portland Trail Blazers, the Philadelphia 76ers, the New Orleans Pelicans, the Miami Heat, the Memphis Grizzlies, and the Utah Jazz. Now, I feel like there are two distinct trends in here, which we'll get into. There are teams that are on the rise and teams that are on the fall in this tier right now. But let's start talking about the LA Clippers. Big changes. Chris Paul obviously departed for Houston. We have Danilo Gallinari coming in, and we're going to see the rebirth of point forward Blake Griffin. What do you think about the LA Clippers this year?
I'm excited to see them. Looking at their preseason games and seeing some of these highlights, I think Lob City could have a resurgence. Who said it left? Now it's Lob forever,
Lob forever.
Lob forever. I think this team is running a lot more than they did last year. And yes, it's only 2 preseason games. I don't put a whole lot of stock into it. But this team could be a very interesting and versatile roster. I think with Beverly, you have increased defense up top to pair with Milos Teodosic, who is just an amazing passer. I'm seeing some of the passes he's done in the past 2 days, and I am speechless. He's going to open up the floor so much more for Blake Griffin, and he also will keep DeAndre relevant on the offensive end, because we look at DeAndre as a rim-rolling big whose opportunities are mostly created by Chris Paul all his career. Well, now you have a player who I'm not comparing to Chris Paul directly, but who will open up those lobs and those spaces for DeAndre to dart in and convert and finish. And with Danilo Gallinari, you have another player who will play 3 but can play small ball 4 in spots. Austin Rivers, I'm looking for another year development from him. I think they have one of the most potent front courts in the league with Jordan, Griffin, and Gallinari. I'm just more worried defensively. They don't really have a lot of 3-point shooting. None of the members of the squad shot better than 39% last season. You have to look at injury concerns, particularly with Griffin and Gallinari. Only 5 players are left from the 2016-2017 roster. And it's just going to be interesting to look in. The depth at 3 also is something I thought about, and I'm rather concerned, especially when I see Doc not moving so far from putting Austin Rivers at the 3 in spots, which I feel is more of a situational matchup, not something that we can make a regular part of his game. I know we're going small, but he's like 6'4",
Yeah, I don't like that. I don't. When you play that positionless basketball, I think you want everybody to be in like the 6'6" to 6'8" range. You really don't want to play a guy who's 6'4" at the 3. There are going to be a lot of problems with this team, and there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for this team. But I think you touched on some of the guys that really are interesting to me. They picked up Lou Williams, which can be very interesting. He's kind of a heat check guy, filling that Jamal Crawford role. They picked up Montrezl Harrell, who's a high-energy big, who I really, really enjoyed at Louisville, and will be interested to see him develop into a larger role, hopefully, with the Clippers. Sam Decker can be kind of a compelling prospect. He's sort of in that same boat going into his 3rd season. Shown flashes of being a good player. He's very cerebral. He can do a lot of things on the court. He's a decent defender. But there are a lot of guys on this roster that I'm kind of meh about too. Bryce Johnson, I mean, not Bryce Johnson, Wesley Johnson just has not ever done anything for
Oh,
me.
yes.
I don't like...
One of the biggest busts.
Exactly. I don't like Austin Rivers. I mean, nobody can talk me into this, that he's anything more than his dad playing for his dad. I really don't like Austin Rivers. I don't know what he really brings to the court except for irrational confidence. He's like a worse J.R. Smith to me.
Wow.
But I really like Teodosic. I think he's going to be a compelling case to watch. He's a very European-style player. He plays a really, really up-tempo, fast pick-and-roll, moving the ball up and down the floor offense, which is definitely going to be a departure from what LA was last year when they were kind of a slower team, kind of a half-court team. So it's going to be a pick up the pace. And one guy that I kind of just want to mention offhand as a player I really loved coming out of the draft was Sindarius Thornwell out of South Carolina. He was a big body. He played incredibly well in the tournament. He's got long arms. He can score. Now, I don't know what role he's going to find with this team because they seem to have that 2 and 3 position filled pretty deep. But it would be interesting to me if Thornwell got to play. And under Doc Rivers, that's not really going to happen a lot. Rookies don't get a ton of minutes, and that goes back even to his Celtics and Magic years. But I think Thornwell can be a compelling player. He's a player who can do a little bit of everything, kind of a Swiss Army knife. So if the injury bug starts to hit, it would be interesting to me to see a guy like Thornwell pick up some more minutes for this LA Clippers team.
Yeah, you pretty much analyzed it pretty well. That was really nice.
Right.
A good finish.
All right, so let's go on to the next team in this tier, the Portland Trail Blazers. And I think you had said this earlier, so go ahead and give me your Portland Trail Blazers breakdown because I totally agree with what you're going to say here.
All right, well, I feel the Blazers are stuck in a rut as far as how much more they can improve. I know they made some noise trying to get into the talks for Carmelo. I'm almost glad they didn't get him because that would have raised expectations that aren't really there, to be honest. As much as I like the backcourt of Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, I really feel that one of the two, and at this point, they're both so good I don't even know which one of those two would be moved, but I feel that one of them has to go in order to raise the ceiling of this team to another level. Right now, we're stuck with a bunch of players who are, I call them a team of 6 men. Other than CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard, the rest of the team, aside from maybe Nurkic, I'll give him credit, are interesting players who I think are given too big of a role than they are built for at this time. I don't know. I look at them and I don't really see, like I said, I just see a major shortage of talent compared to these other Western Conference powerhouses. They don't really have enough two-way players. They have, if you will, too many specialists and almost very little to none scoring at the forward spots. And then if no shots are falling for Damian McCollum, then they're cooked. Simple.
Yeah. There's this team. I was just looking back through this. I love Terry Stotts. I think he's a fantastic coach. And I love what he does, particularly balancing McCollum and Lillard. And I will be very interested in seeing how he works Nurkic into this lineup. But to me, this is a team a lot like Toronto in the Eastern Conference. They're in a little bit better position because their talented 3 players are younger. Lillard will be 27, or Lillard is 27, McCollum is 26, and Nurkic is only 23. So they got some years on the Lowry, DeRozan, Serge Ibaka trio. But to me, it's sort of a similar situation in that there's not a lot of flexibility. They certainly maximize themselves by getting Nurkic, but I'm not sure where this team goes. And I think that you make such a prescient point that there are a lot of decent players and not a lot of good players on this roster. You've got a lot of players like Al-Farouq Aminu, like Myers Leonard, like Mo Harkless, that are just fine players. They'll probably be rotation players on a lot of good teams in the league, but that's about it. And to me, that's what this Portland roster is. And you said it so well. It's a team full of 6 men. You've got Evan Turner, you've got Myers Leonard, you've got all these guys who are pretty good, decent, sort of just middling, who are going to go in and play 16 to 25 a game and do fine, but you're never going to write home about them. And to me, they need to upgrade somewhere, but I just don't see how they can do it with the roster made up how it is.
That's true, and I don't see packages in which they could ship out, let's say, Al-Farouq Aminu and Evan Turner and get back a Carmelo or one of those type of players. Like, you can match salaries, but even other teams are going to go and look at these players and go, wait a second, they're not really. I give my superstar expiring contract or whatever for those players, you know?
Yeah.
I think, like you said, there's just a real low ceiling on this team. And I don't know. It's sad because in the East, they're a playoff team easily. With the coaching they have and the high scoring guards in McCollum and Lillard, easily a playoff team. In the West, I say lucky if they get the 8th seed.
They will be struggling to get the 8th seed, most definitely.
Mm-hmm. And it's not going to be easy for them by any stretch of the imagination. And I don't know. I mean, obviously, we talk about it all the time, but defensively, the backcourt is horrible. I mean, they're undersized. I don't think they lack for effort too much. Lillard sometimes has lapse in attention as far as staying on his man off ball, but on ball, they both try. But McCollum and Lillard bleed points offensively on that end.
Yeah, and I don't see them having a ton of valuable assets to move. Their draft pick's going to be in that late lottery range, that early playoff range, in the 12 to 20, which never seems to be incredibly valuable. And you start looking at packages they can put together to move some pieces. You're going to probably include Evan Turner because of his salary. And then you probably have to include somebody like Zach Collins, who has a lot of interesting potential as a player, as a stretch four in the league. He's a 7-footer. Or a Caleb Swanigan, who's a low post player who may or may not fit into the modern league. And then Noah Vonleh, who is what he is. We've seen it in Charlotte and now in Portland. And I just don't know, if there's any team in the league who's looking to move from not even a superstar, but like a decent player. I don't even look at this package and go yeah, I would totally take Evan Turner and Zach Collins to give you a starter. I just don't see it.
No, I don't either. And I actually have one last question for you.
Oh, you cut out there.
I'm thinking.
What was the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. Who do you see starting at the 3 between? I'm looking at the 2 right now. Evan Turner and.
I think it's Mo Harkless. I think Mo Harkless is probably the starter. He played. I watched a few minutes of them playing the other night, and Mo Harkless seemed to be working with that early unit a lot. But it's probably. I think probably their starting 5 is Lillard, McCollum, Nurkic, Aminu, and Harkless. But I could be totally wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But that's if I'm looking at the roster and I know these players not as well as Terry Stotts, because Terry Stotts is the man. But if I'm looking at these players, that's probably who I start. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, never know.
Turner's was a very good player in Boston when he came off the bench as that second unit ball handler, and I think that's kind of where you want to keep him.
And see, that's what I was torn on, because part of me says, hey, bring in Turner as the secondary creator for McCollum and Lillard as they go out. But then I thought, hey, if you have Turner in the starting lineup, you can relieve pressure from McCollum and Lillard, who are both great shooters, and have Turner initiate the offense to get Lillard and McCollum more shots off ball. And so I was thinking about that, and I said, well, the weakness is Maurice Harkless. I think it's not a stretch to say he's a better shooter than Turner. And also, if Lillard and McCollum, as they should, have the ball in their hands, then it really makes Evan Turner more of a non-entity on the offensive end.
Yeah. It will be interesting to see how they develop, and obviously they have some key holes that they need to fill in. So this team to me is about 6 players deep. Beyond that, they're sort of meh. It'll be interesting to see how they develop guys and if they can develop guys, because they need some homegrown talent to really bolster this roster. All right, the next team, one of the most compelling teams in the league, one of the most talked about teams in the league, the Philadelphia 76ers. And on building on that point, I kind of feel like I don't have a ton to say about this team outside of this. If you get quality games out of Joel Embiid, out of Ben Simmons, out of Markelle Fultz, you're probably a playoff team in the Eastern Conference, and if you don't, you're not.
Hey, simple as that. I have just about the same short synopsis for him as well. I think the veterans are going to need to set the tone. If the veterans come in, they already have their culture. They can come in and still provide, in J.J. Redick's case, good shooting. In Amir Johnson's case, rebounding and defensive intensity. And they help those young players on the 76ers get with that mentality and that mindset. They can make some noise. If they're injured and ineffective, I think the young ones will go at.
I think the most compelling question for them, and it'll be the only one we talk about, because we can talk about Philadelphia, and we will talk about Philadelphia quite a bit throughout this season. But I think that's probably the discussion left for another day, because everything at this point, until we see something, everything it feels like has been said, except for this one question. Can they move on from Jahlil Okafor? And if they do, can they get a quality piece out of him?
I don't have much hope in that based off of the return that they received for Nerlens Noel. But I do realize that they are different players. Not so much in terms of leverage, though, because both teams, or all teams that are going to trade for Okafor, know that the 76ers don't really have leverage,
Yeah.
And each player is fundamentally flawed in a certain area. Draft him in 2003, and we're talking something totally different.
Yeah.
But I don't know if 2015 was the time for him, especially with how versatile and pace and space the floor is for his game. Defensively, he's a turnstile. I don't know if that's going to really work with teams that are going to acquire him. And I'm struggling to think of a team that would work for him other than the teams that are just bereft of talent. And then that wouldn't work because how's Philadelphia going to get an adequate return from one of those teams? A Chicago, a Brooklyn, one of the teams of that nature.
Yeah, I don't know what you want from a Jahlil Okafor when you are looking for returns, but the team that I had written down, actually you just mentioned them, is the Brooklyn Nets. I think the Brooklyn Nets are in this position where they're about to get control of their franchise again after Billy King gave it away. And if you haven't, you got to listen to the Bad GM podcast we did a couple of weeks ago if you want to talk about Billy King. But we've talked about that. We know who Billy King is. But the Nets are about to get control of their franchise again for the first time in about the past 5 years. And they're getting ready to be able to start to turn the corner out of desperation and into something quality. They picked up D'Angelo Russell, who's a compelling young player this year. They drafted Jared Allen out of Texas, who can certainly do some things that get you excited. But you can get into, maybe it's an Allen Crabbe, maybe it's a Damari Carroll. If Philadelphia starts to get into the playoff hunt, Brooklyn has a few assets that aren't super entertaining. Like you're not really pumped about getting these guys on your team. But when it comes to having a seventh man, an eighth man in a playoff rotation, a guy like Damari Carroll, a guy like Allen Crabbe, even a guy like Timofey Mozgov can be really compelling for them. And if they lower their standards enough to where that's enough of a return for what they're giving out in Jahlil Okafor, who was a high pick in the draft, then I think that Brooklyn can make a very interesting trade partner. And it really looks good for Brooklyn to get a guy to pair with Russell and Jahlil Okafor. Now you've taken two chances, but you're no worse off than you were yesterday. And to me, that's the case for Jahlil Okafor into Brooklyn.
I can agree with that. I can see where you're coming from, and that's something interesting to look into. I actually personally would think it'd be nice comparing the first two picks of the 2015 NBA draft.
Yeah.
Or no, the first three.
Yeah.
Two of the first three.
Yeah, that would be really cool, and it's a situation where Okafor can come in and develop at his own pace. He will have the space to work, and it really could be nice. I think the downside to this is they're in the same division. And if I were Philadelphia and I thought that Jahlil Okafor could succeed somewhere, I would not trade him in the division. If you don't think he's a very good player, you can trade him in the division without a lot of consequence. But if you think he's a good player, you're probably not going to trade him into a position where you have to play him 4 and 5 and 6 times a year.
See, and I get you on that, but I'm even less confident about that. Like, he can barely get playing time on my team. What's he going to do on someone else's team? You know what I mean? That's how I look at it. Yeah. Like, if he isn't even that much of an impact maker to see the floor on my own squad, I don't care how many times I got playing. He's a scrub. I'm not saying that he is, but I'm saying if Philadelphia is confident that he is not fit for their roster and is not, talented enough, doesn't bring those qualities to the table, then ship them down the street. You know what I mean? I got to pass them before I go to work every day.
All right, let's move on from them. I'm going to lump these next three teams into one. We're going to talk about them. Let's talk about the Miami Heat, the Memphis Grizzlies, and the Utah Jazz. Now, this is where I think the divide is. I think Miami is a team on the rise, and I think Memphis and Utah. Utah got worse because they lost an all-star in Gordon Hayward. Memphis is getting older, and they didn't really add anything, and they lost Zach Randolph and Vince Carter. And Miami is a team that's compelling but certainly flawed. Goran Dragic was fantastic as a player in the Eurobasket, but I don't know what I expect from any of these three teams outside of sort of falling in that 38 win range and probably missing the playoffs. Miami might make the playoffs. They might be a 41, 42 win team. But Memphis and Utah are in the Western Conference, and that's a scary place to be these days.
I'm right with it. I think that Miami, I'm a little more pessimistic than most. Their team to me is primarily comprised of role players who have received pretty substantial contracts for long-term deals. And I do not like the way those deals will age out, and I'm not really a big fan of them now. I think that the Miami front office overanalyzed or was overexcited on that one dominant stretch they had and invested into that for the long haul. I'm kind of concerned as to how that will go. As far as Memphis is concerned, they will be interesting. They went from one of the older teams in the NBA to one of the youngest. Last year, the oldest player was 40-year-old Vince Carter. This year, he's 32-year-old Marc Gasol. So that'll be interesting to see how those players work and fit together, along with injury-prone but talented players such as Tyreek Evans and Mario Chalmers.
And Chandler Parsons.
I didn't even mention him because...
You didn't mention him because he doesn't play basketball.
Exactly. No, exactly. Oh, my goodness. And then Utah, I think... I like them. They're the one team of the three you mentioned I'm positive on. My thing is who's going to provide a reliable source of offense each and every night. And that if you solve that, then I think you're good. There's still a very deep roster. There's still a very defensive-minded roster. The addition of Ricky Rubio with the coach and Quinn Snyder. But offensively, that go-to option. If they get that, I think they're in a good place.
One more note on Utah. I'm really excited about Donovan Mitchell. I'm not sure how much playing time he is, but in Summer League, he was fantastic. He's a guy who really looks like he can be something. So I think
the dude got an edge.
Yeah, he and Rudy Gobert are a reason to tune in to watch this team once a week when you're on the League Pass because they can be pretty compelling just because of those things right there. All right, let's move on to the last team in this tier. In the tier of something to prove, and that's the New Orleans Pelicans. Now, we know what the New Orleans Pelicans are on paper, but I don't think we know what the New Orleans Pelicans can be in terms of reaching their potential.
We don't. I know that with the two dominant big men they have, Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins, I think they only go as far as those two take them. But I also think that we have to look at their backcourt, and I'm intrigued and yet cautious about the application of Rajon Rondo into the starting lineup alongside Jrue Holiday. For one, everyone talks about the shooting, but seriously, the shooting might be an issue. I was looking at this just now, and Rajon Rondo last year shot a career-high 37% from three. But do you know how many threes he took? He only took 133 of them, and he only made 50 of them.
Yes, that's like one and a half per game and made 0.7 of one per game.
Exactly, and because of his lack of shooting, most of those were wide open because defenders don't respect his outside shooting. So you're going to go 50 for 133. For his career, he is 240 for 790, so exactly 30%. And you're matching that with the player Jrue Holiday, who is better, but marginally. He made 50 more three-pointers than Rondo did. He made 100 of them. And He made 100 of them out of 281. So he shot 35%, which is great. But I'm not sure that is good for an off-ball role player, especially in this sense. They need scoring. They need to relieve pressure from DeMarcus and Anthony Davis. And I don't know if Jrue Holiday has the scoring acumen to be that third scorer that off ball that's, hey, I'm going to score, and not a secondary distributor. When Rondo is going to control the ball so much.
Yeah, it's certainly a roster that seems to be fatally flawed from the outset. Outside of, and that's setting aside, can you play in the modern NBA with two bigs? Which is an argument that could last for an hour on its entire own podcast. This is an experiment. So, I was listening to Jeff Van Gundy. He was on Zach Lowe's podcast, and he said that it's so hard to beat the Warriors at their own game that you have to completely change the game if you want to be competitive. And I think that's what the Pelicans have done, pairing Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins. Now, outside of that, I hate their entire roster. I really like the idea of pairing these two guys together, but the thing that you needed to do was get a bunch of 3-and-D guys. You needed a pure point guard who could distribute the ball, who could make quality entry passes, who could run pick and rolls effectively, and then you needed a bunch of 3-and-D guys, and that's what the roster should have been. Now, I think what they did was the exact opposite of that in acquiring Rajon Rondo, in Tony Allen. Tony Allen, great defensive player, absolutely can't space the floor. Rajon Rondo, really good pure point guard, absolutely can't space the floor. That, to me, is the huge problem with this roster, is that if you wanted to push this experiment to the far reaches of what it could have been, you had to build the roster a certain way. And to me, that the Pelicans roster is not constructed that way. And I think, for that reason, this will be a failure of an experiment.
I agree, and we haven't even touched on the fact they have no small forwards.
Yeah, I was actually talking about this with somebody else earlier. There's a real compelling case that Etuan Moore, who is 6'4" and 191 pounds, might be the best small forward on the roster. He was a point guard at Purdue. He was a point guard for the Bulls. But he might be the best small forward on the roster right now, which is sort of a scary thing for the New Orleans Pelicans as the season approaches.
Yep.
All right, well, that's the next two tiers, so we're going to move through these last few pretty quickly. I mean, there are obviously some other things, some things to touch on with all these teams, but we're going to touch on the big things. The next tier, we just have two teams in this tier. We call it the late lottery, or the Eastern Conference 6 through 8 seeds, and that is Detroit and Charlotte. Detroit, to me, is sort of in that fatally flawed, can't really move anybody flexibly. They have Reggie Jackson, they have Andre Drummond, both of whom have their downfalls as players, and we know what they are. I'm not sure what I like about this team, and I'm not sure that they're going to develop anything that's particularly compelling this season.
I'm right along with it. I've always been a Reggie Jackson fan. I'm not sure if that is any more the case. Andre Drummond, to me, I heard he knocked down some threes yesterday. That was interesting to hear.
Didn't he hit more threes yesterday than he did all last season or something crazy?
Yeah,
crazy
I think it was like 3 or 4. Yeah. That came out of nowhere, absolutely nowhere. But still, I mean, he's only 20.
Yeah.
Guys, a dominant. He's not a Shaq. He's not a Shaq. He's clearly not a Shaq. But he's not even a Dwight Howard to me. I don't think you could put him as the best player on a pseudo contender. I think he has to be a second banana. And I don't think Reggie Jackson is the best player on the team, or should be. And so that leaves me in a rather unsettling view of Detroit. I think Stan Van Gundy's trying to recreate that Orlando Magic vision, but he needs to do that again with a different cast of characters for it to work.
Yeah. Adding Avery Bradley was certainly compelling, and I think there's a very strong argument that Avery Bradley might be their best player going into the season. A player that I really enjoyed when he played for the Celtics. He's a defensive bulldog, and he really can score if you need him to. This team will be improved from what they were last year. They were 37 and 45. I definitely see them hitting about 40, 42. They might even sneak into the 5 seed in the Eastern Conference because the Eastern Conference is so bad. But I think the most compelling question is Reggie Jackson and Andre Drummond are on the roster. Will they be on the roster after the trade deadline? And I think that'll tell us a lot about the direction that this team's going. Corbin? Did I lose you?
Oh, did you hear
Yeah,
me?
no, I didn't. You got cut off.
Oh, I must have said it so fast. No, I said I agree, and then I just stopped. I'm
That
sorry.
was it. Okay. All right. The
Yeah.
other team in this same window is the Charlotte Hornets. I don't know what to say about the Charlotte Hornets outside of they're the same Charlotte Hornets that they've been for about the past 5 seasons. They're going to be between 30 and 40 wins. Nothing is going to be particularly entertaining. My thing about them, my one major point about the Charlotte Hornets is it is interesting to me that they acquired Dwight Howard when no one seemingly wants to play with the guy. So I don't know what he brings to the team. I mean, every stop on his journey is, all right, well, this is a fresh start for Dwight. This will be good for Dwight. He'll be able new city, new team. He'll be able to excel in this thing, and he never does. And so I don't know why people keep signing him, and I definitely don't know why you bring him into a situation where you already know you're a middling roster to begin with.
I mean, yeah. I think that most of NBA management is still looking at Dwight Howard as if we can bring back the 2009 through 2012 Dwight Howard. And that Dwight Howard is gone, no longer exists. You're wasting your time.
Yep.
And, I mean, yesterday he had a really nice move on Boban, which I thought was kind of cool, where he rebounded the ball, took it up full court, and then ended it on a spin move and a two-handed dunk, which reminded me of shades of Dwight of the past, which was kind of nice. But for the most part, I'm not sure. I think they thought, hey, we need a big guy, a big name, possibly. Obviously, he's Dwight Howard, so he must be an upgrade over Cody Zeller, even though Cody Zeller was actually way more important to the offensive versatility of the Hornets than Dwight Howard was for his Hawks. But even going past that, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see if they can create a dynamic between Kemba Walker and Dwight Howard where that two-man game works, and maybe he can become a dominant pick-and-roll guy again, or at least a serviceable one, and Kemba can build off of his shooting and creation, and then maybe Nicholas Batum can be the Hedo Turkoglu, and they just bring the Orlando Magic into Charlotte. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, I guess that's certainly the thought process. I'm just not sure how much I'm with it at this point in Dwight Howard's career, particularly circling his back injuries, his history of back injuries. That tends to be the undoing for big athletic guys. And, I mean, it basically ended Larry Bird's career, and that was a long time ago, but back...
It's the back and the knees.
Yeah, those are things... And the feet, with big guys, the back, the knees, and the feet. Are the
Oh,
things
yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Back, knees, and feet.
Yep. And listen, I don't know what you want out of this roster. I think you're going to get what you probably pretty well expect, which is going to be about 38 wins, which will bring them up from their 36 from last year. But that's about all I have on the Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah, I agree.
All right.
I'm with it. I think that, they kind of are what we think they are.
Going on, here's our next tier of teams that I think we can sort of lump together. This just has 3 question marks over the top of it because we don't know what these teams are, and I think that's they can be good and they can, show competitive flashes, or they can fall into the toilet and be lottery teams. And that is the Sacramento Kings, the Dallas Mavericks, the LA Lakers, and the Brooklyn Nets. What do you have to say about all these teams in terms of what they can do this year to improve their stock? They're all going to be young rosters. They're going to be developing rosters. I certainly see them all as rosters on the rise, but I'm not sure what that means for this year.
So I'm going to, like you said, lump them together. I feel if the young players on each of those teams, De'Aaron Fox, Lonzo Ball, for Brooklyn, D'Angelo Russell, for the Lakers, I want to say Kyle Kuzma, no, but also Dennis Smith Jr. If those young players progress, get a hold of the NBA game, catch and develop quickly, I think that will help them, as well as the veterans on all those teams. So if the veterans even play, I don't even want to say, I mean, all the veterans on these teams here are closer to the end of their effectiveness as NBA players, in my eyes. You have Zach Randolph, Vince Carter in Sacramento. Dallas, you have 20-year vet guys in their mid-30s. For the Lakers, a rapidly declining Luol Deng. Brook Lopez, actually young as a veteran, but he's been in the league almost 10 years now. For Brooklyn, Timothy Mozgov, Damari Carroll have been in the league for a bit. And I think if all of those players bring back something of the previous production of their last 3 years. So all of them were serviceable players at some point these last 3 years. If they come in, know their role, don't rock the boat, don't get injured, play at least semi-productive basketball along in tandem with these young ones, I think that each team can make at least minor strides and something to build for the next year.
If you had to pick one of these teams to hitch your wagon to, which of these teams do you think is going to be most successful? I'm not saying playoffs. I'm not asking any of that. But Sacramento, Dallas, LA, Brooklyn, which of these 4 teams do you think is going to be the most successful in terms of in the win column?
All right, so I'm biased.
I do.
When I think of my Lakers, but I'm actually going to go with Brooklyn.
Interesting.
I think the team fits, not bearing injury, and they're in the East.
Yeah.
So
yep.
I think they automatically get an edge up there. I like the way that Sean Marks has put together this team, and Kenny Atkinson is a very good coach in my eyes with the way he gets these players and focuses on personal development and gets the most out of them. Brook Lopez went from being a back-to-the-basket, low-post center to a floor spacer of the highest degree, in addition to improving slightly on his rebounding and becoming more of a dynamic offensive threat. I feel Timothy Mozgov is going to unlock a bit of potential that we don't even know is still in the 31-year-old. I think D'Angelo Russell's going to flourish in there. Damari Carroll might look good.
I lost you for a second there, but
diversify his role.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that there can be a lot of development for Brooklyn, but I think you hit the big point. Most importantly, is that they're in the Eastern Conference. That's probably good for like 30 wins right there, and I think it will be interesting to see how these teams develop. I'm very high on all these teams because of Dennis Smith Jr., because of Lonzo Ball, because of De'Aaron Fox, even because of D'Angelo Russell. I'm really high on all these teams, and they're teams that I definitely want to watch, which says a lot about them in terms of the way they've developed, because I don't know who wanted to watch the Sacramento Kings very often last year, but I definitely know that Sacramento, the Lakers, the Mavs, the Nets will certainly find their way into my League Pass queue this year because they're a little bit more compelling than what they've been in years past.
You're right. And it's kind of funny when we were just talking about this now that all 4 of these question mark teams are headlined by a major point guard who's still very young and bursting with potential.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of funny that they all kind of start and end with that one player.
So it'll be
at each of the floor general positions.
It is very interesting to me that there are so many good point guards in the league. That's something that is going to be interesting night in and night out, because it does provide a very compelling matchup. Almost nightly, you're going to find 2 point guards who are either young with a lot of potential or established as quality point guards facing off. I think De'Aaron Fox is probably the one that interests me the most. I imagine Lonzo Ball is the one that interests you the most, but I can't wait to see these guys lace up and play.
Especially Lonzo. If I can give a quick aside on him,
sure.
I'm concerned about how he'll be able to find. Wrote a quick article on that at Forum Blue and Gold, but I was concerned. And in fact, I'll joke around with my friends all the time, and I go, see, my shot can make it to the NBA. But I'm actually not sure if I can say it so well, because his shooting percentage, except for that 36-point explosion against the 76ers in the Summer League, has been pretty lackluster. And I feel most of it is because he needs room to get off that jump shot of his. And in the NBA, the defenders are so much more athletic. The schemes are so much more compressed and tightened that it's really hard to get room for it. And a lot of his shots, and I, again, profess to this because of the way I shoot, there is almost no way that shot works well from the mid-range. It is a shot that is like, it's either you're launching it from 3 or you're not shooting it.
Yeah.
Just because of the way you have to get it off of your hip and extend out of your hand, just the whole motion. And so I'm concerned, his rebounding and assists and passing is great, but can he shoot and score enough to become an offensive threat, or are we going to be putting him into the Michael Carter-Williams role?
Yeah, that
sooner or later.
That is going to be a compelling development, because I think that's been the question surrounding Lonzo Ball ever since his time at UCLA was, he can't shoot very well. His mechanics have a horrible hitch in them. What can he do to improve those things? And it's certainly within the realm of possibility to improve them, but with such a nice comparison that went so wrongly in Michael Carter-Williams, he certainly can see the path that you should not take, but it will be interesting to see how he can develop in that role because it is so hard to learn to shoot. That's a thing that's very hard to do that quote-unquote late in the game when you've been playing basketball for 12 or 14 years now and your shot has such a weird hitch in it. I think Josh Jackson finds himself right there in that same discussion as a guy whose shot is not impressive, but he has a lot of other impressive assets that can make him a very good player. Which brings me to the last set of teams, now that I've said Josh Jackson and the Phoenix Suns. We called this the Doncic lottery because Luka Doncic
love that name.
Looks like the most compelling prospect right now. Obviously, before college ball has started, and we haven't seen what Bagley and Porter and the other American prospects are bringing to the table. But we called this the Doncic lottery, and the teams in this group are Indiana, Chicago, Phoenix, Atlanta, Orlando, and New York. And these are the teams that probably will pencil them in for under 30 wins. And probably won't be incredibly entertaining. Who are the guys on any of these rosters that jumps out at you? Obviously, Kristaps Porzingis, number one in that regard.
I can get with that. I also am intrigued to see if Josh Jackson can flourish in Phoenix with their type of style consistently, and especially on the offensive end. His shooting, obviously, with that hitch in his jump shot, is a sore spot. Can he find a way to push past that and make himself a viable offensive threat, a go-to player? Zach LaVine, when he returns from injury to Chicago, how will he adjust to that ACL? Will he be at least 90% of the player that he was, 85%? Will he make a full recovery? It'll be interesting to see. And lastly, I want to see how Victor Oladipo is as the primary offensive player for the Indiana Pacers. How he's going to be as that go-to guy. He's always been sort of a second option. Well, even in Orlando, I think it was by committee over there. But in Oklahoma City, he was clearly a second option, and he struggled in that off-ball role. So how will he adjust as the primary offensive force? Force is probably a strong word, but on Indiana, how will he adjust in that role?
I think the most compelling guys to sort of add to that are Miles Turner of Indiana and Jonathan Isaac of Orlando. Jonathan Isaac, Miles Turner.
Oh, okay.
Let's start with Miles Turner just for a second. Miles Turner certainly showed flashes of being a potential franchise player last year, and he can do a lot of things on the court. And now that I think Paul George is gone, he's going to be a lot more of the focal point for the Indiana Pacers. I think that I'm not sure how he's going to pair with Oladipo, like you said. Is it going to be kind of an alternating thing? But it'll be interesting to see how they can get him the ball and what he can do with it, because he did look so compelling and he's still so young, only going into his third season. He's a huge guy. He's hyper athletic, and he can do a lot of things very well on the court. So I'll be really, really watching that as the Indiana Pacers' compelling storyline of this season. And then to flip that over on the other side, Orlando is a team that I have a lot of questions about. They've drafted high for a very long time and missed on a lot of guys. Their roster is not full of guys that you would want to trade for, which I think when you've drafted that high in the draft so many times, that's what you want. You hope that your roster has a lot of guys that people covet, because then you can start to make the moves and change things up. But I mean, outside of Jonathan Isaac, I don't know how many of these guys are coveted on other rosters, and I think that's what makes Isaac such a compelling player, in that he's long, he's athletic, he can play the 3, he can play the 4, he can play the 5, he's a great defensive player, he's a great rim protector, he is just interesting, he is just full of potential, and to me that's the only reason that Orlando is worth watching at all.
And that is something I think it'll be interesting. Who, I'm not gonna lie, Aaron Gordon, Oladipo back when he was here, Elfrid Payton. Well, not me and Elfrid Payton, but we came in with pretty high expectations for them. It's going to be interesting to see if that development actually follows through. We kind of been waiting for years.
Yeah.
I'm still waiting for Vucevic, 26 now. Any point in time you want to become that second coming of, I compare him to somebody that I immediately regret now. Oh my goodness. I forgot who I compared him to, but at this point he's more of a Mehmet Okur than a Sabonis, which I thought he could develop into.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting question, talking about Vucevic and Mario Hezonja, they have some good international players. I think they've built the roster in a really weird way in that you don't really know what position you're going to put Aaron Gordon in. You don't really know what position you're going to put Bismack Biyombo in. You don't really know how Evan Fournier and Elfrid Payton and Mario Hezonja sort of pair together. And then you got Jonathan Isaac that you want to get in there. You just signed Jonathan Simmons as a really compelling, electric player who probably will come off the bench and give you some really, really nice minutes like he did for the Spurs last year. And the roster construction's weird, and it leaves a lot to be desired. And I think that's why you're going to find Orlando right back in this spot again next year.
More than likely. I agree. More than likely. It's sad, you always hope for the best, but I think they'll end up right, same position. And I think if that happens, management's going to have to take a hard look at that roster and just be pressed to make some moves.
Yep.
Because you can't keep having middling free agent signings around a core that will never produce.
Yeah, particularly
it just doesn't work.
A core that you don't even know what they are. I mean, I don't know how many guys on this roster that other teams would want to take a gamble on, and that to me is concerning for a team that has been so young. Like, compare them to Philadelphia, and Philadelphia had done so well drafting, and they drafted a lot higher than Orlando in a lot of these drafts, but Philadelphia produced a ton of players, or at least 3 players, maybe 4 players if you count Sarge, maybe 5 if you count Jahlil Okafor, maybe 6 if you count Nerlens Noel. They consistently produced these players that were coveted by other teams, that were compelling for other teams, that other teams tried to put together packages to acquire, which let Philadelphia sort of incrementally grow as a team. And Orlando just hasn't done any of that. None of these guys are compelling. None of these guys are going to fit on other rosters without taking a hit on what you think their value could be, their perceived value.
True. I mean, now, when I got me depressed on them.
Yeah.
I'm listening. I'm just like, wow, yeah, you're right.
That's sad.
Very sobering. Yep.
All right, well, that took us through the tiers. I think we've covered a little bit of everybody. Obviously, you could go more into depth with any one of these teams and talk about them for hours, but we're about to hit the
we could be on here for the next 6 hours.
I was going to say, we're about to hit the 90-minute mark, which I'm not sure anybody wants to hang out with us for 90 minutes and go through everything, but that's why it's here. You can listen to it in parts, Yeah,
man, we're a fun group, Alex. I think people will see that. We're pretty fun.
We do good, Like, people want to hang out with us and listen to us. So hopefully you made it all the way through the 90 minutes of this podcast. But Corban, thanks for coming on, man, and thanks for finishing up the show. We've done about 3 hours now in the past couple of days, but I think we really covered a lot of stuff and covered the compelling questions that they're gonna make this NBA season one of the most entertaining that I can possibly remember.
I agree, Alex. We always go in depth, and it's always a pleasure to be a guest on your show.
Man, you can come back anytime you want to. You want to get a plug in for anything before we call it quits?
Other than the work that we're doing right here, I have a piece that should be coming out on the Lakers pretty soon. I'm trying to develop that as we go along, so hopefully I'll have that out. I'll put that on my Twitter page, Corban Ford NBA.
All right.
Other than that, no, just keep following you and your content, man. Like I said, you go in depth on your podcast, and with or without being on, they're a joy to listen to.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. And we'll definitely have you back during the regular season. Got to talk about all kinds of things. Probably do a whole podcast dedicated to your Los Angeles Lakers here in a couple of weeks when we start to see them take shape.
I would love to be part of that. Honestly, you can talk about the Lakers all day.
All right, man. Well, I'll talk to you later.
All right, definitely, man. Thanks a lot.
See ya. Well, that concludes our breakdown of the tiers of the NBA, and I'd like to thank my guest Corban Ford for coming on the show. It's always nice to have him on, and if you enjoyed him, I'm sure we'll have him back this season. throughout the season, covering a myriad of topics, including his own Los Angeles Lakers. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at @the_Alex_West. Make sure you're following the show on Twitter at @and1analytics. Subscribe on YouTube, on SoundCloud, on iTunes, wherever it is you get your podcast, so you're getting the latest and greatest on the NBA from the N1 podcast. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, Alex West. Have a good day.